Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to talk something about functional programming. So functional programming is nothing but it is kind of a style of programming in which you write code in a particular fashion. So let's say you have to perform a particular task via your program. So in that case, in case of functional programming, what functional programming suggests is that you basically have your code written in functions. So we have already discussed about what functions are. So basically functions are like a black box, or it is a set of code which is going to take the data, it is going to manipulate the data, that is, it is going to carry out some operation on the data, and then it is actually going to return us a certain value or return us a certain result. So what function programming essentially means is that we take up the entire code, divide that code into particular functions or small chunks which are called as functions, and the data which we are going to process is going to pass in from one function to other function. So let's say we have two functions. So what usually happens in functional programming is that the data is passed to the first function. The first function is going to process the data and it is going to pass on to the next function. So the next function is going to take that data. It is again going to apply some operation onto the data, and finally it is going to return us the result. So the formal definition of functional programming is to define everything in the form of functions and passing one function as an argument to other functions. So essentially you have multiple functions in place and you pass in one function as an argument to other function. Now if it sounds a little bit difficult, then let's go ahead and take a simple example so as to understand how functional programming works. So let's define two simple functions here. So let's say we want to have a set of data and we want to perform a bunch of operations on that data. So let's assume that we want to have integer data, and the first operation which we want to perform is to add 10 to it. So you could define a function as add underscore 10. So this is obviously going to take a parameter as x, and what this function does is that let's assume that this is going to add up 10 to the x variable. So simply return here x plus 10. So obviously this function is going to take up the value which is stored in x, and it is going to add up 10 to that value, and it is going to return us a result. Now let's go ahead and write in another function which is called as the twice function, which actually executes a function itself twice. So as you could see right now, we have this function, and when we are going to write in the twice function, what the twice function is going to do is that whatever function we are going to call, it is actually going to execute the code in that particular function twice. So let's define the twice function. So let's type in def twice, and here let's pass in the first parameter as the function itself. So func, so let's say this accepts a function, and the next one is going to be the argument to the function. So as any function has two parts, the function itself and the argument, we are also going to have two parts here. So let's say we have function and argument here, and what this function is essentially going to do is that it is going to return the function with an argument to a function. So here we type in return the function itself, which is the function which we have passed over here, and it is going to pass in the function which is func, and to this it is going to pass in the argument. So once we have defined these two functions, let's go ahead and learn how to use them. So the first function is actually going to add up the value of 10, and the next function is going to basically call any function twice. So what we essentially want to do here is that let's assume that we want to add 20 to a particular value. So the first thing which we do is that we print out the result, and to this we actually pass in the first function as the twice function, so that the operation which we want gets executed twice, because we actually want to add 20 instead of adding 10. So to this twice function, as you could see, it accepts two values. The first value which it accepts is the function itself. So to this function right here, we want to pass in the value or the name of the function which we want to execute twice. So we basically want to add 10 twice. So you simply type in add 10 over here, which is a function which is passed to this function twice over here. So after adding add 10, you actually need to pass in an argument to this function. So let's say the argument is going to be, let's say 10. So let's say we want to add 20 to 10. So we also pass in 10 over here. So if you save the code now, and if you actually run it, as you could see, you will get a value as 30. And what essentially happens in this code is that the very first thing which it does is that it takes the add function and it is going to pass the value of 10 to this function right here. So 10 plus 10 is essentially going to be 20. So what this is going to do is that it is going to return the result as 20. So now what happens is that the twice function actually again passes the function and argument over here. So now the new argument which we have is going to be 20, and the function which we have passed to the twice function is add 10. So it is going to take 10, which is this 10, and it is going to take the value which is 20, and it is going to pass it to this function. So finally this function is going to return us a value as 30, and that value actually gets printed right over here. So that's basically how we could use functional programming. So this was a simple example which I have taken so as to make you guys understand how functional programming works. So functional programming is nothing but dividing your code into small little bits which are called as functions. So basically you have a function which accepts value and returns a value, and what you could do is that you could pass in one function as an argument to other function. So that's it for this lecture, and I hope you guys understood how functional programming works. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.